I want you to be honest with yourself for a second. You don't have to say anything out loud, just notice. Has this ever happened to you? You text someone you care about. Could be a friend, a partner, a coworker, doesn't matter. And they text back one word. K. Not sounds good, not haha yeah, just K. And even though you know it probably means nothing, that they're driving or in a meeting or just busy, your chest tightens, your brain kicks into high gear. Did I say something wrong? Are they upset with me? Why does one letter feel like a rejection? And then comes the second wave, the embarrassment, because you're aware you're spiraling over a text, and that makes it worse. Keep watching, because I think by the end of this video, something about yourself is finally going to make sense. Not a lecture, a conversation. Okay, let me paint a picture. It's late. You've got work tomorrow. You should be asleep. And instead your brain decides, right now at 11:47 p.m. is the perfect time to replay an awkward thing you said at a happy hour in 2019. You remember the exact moment, the slight pause before someone laughed, the way one person kind of looked away. You weren't even sure if it was a thing, but your brain saved it, archived it. And tonight? Tonight it's back on the main stage. You're the writer, the director, and the world's harshest film critic, all at once, editing a scene that nobody else even remembers. I know you know exactly what I mean. Or this one. Your manager sends you feedback on a project. Super reasonable stuff. Great work overall, maybe just tighten up the executive summary. And your face does the professional thing, smiles, says, "Totally, thanks for the note." But inside you've already decided you're bad at your job, that everyone on the team has noticed, that you've been faking competence this whole time, and this one comment just proved it. So you spend the next 3 hours redoing the entire deck, not because they asked, but because you cannot sit in the discomfort of feeling like you let someone down. Let that breathe for a second. That's not a productivity problem. That's not perfectionism. That's something neurological. And we're going to get into exactly what it is. A little more vulnerable here. You're not performing empathy. You actually get it. Let's talk about rejection for a minute. Not the big stuff, not getting dumped or laid off. I'm talking about the everyday stuff that other people seem to shake off in 30 seconds. Your friend cancels plans. They say they're tired, completely valid. But your brain doesn't file it as "they're tired." It files it as "they didn't want to see me." You send a voice memo, a long one, vulnerable, real, and they respond with a thumbs up reaction. Pause, let it hang. A thumbs up. And now you're in a full internal spiral about whether this friendship is even real. Or you're in a Zoom call and your idea gets kind of glossed over. Nobody shuts it down, it just doesn't get picked up. And you spend the rest of the meeting pretending to take notes while quietly wondering if you're actually as smart as you thought you were. Here's what makes this so hard. You can't explain it to people. Because objectively, a thumbs up is fine. A canceled plan is normal life. You can't tell someone, "I've been in an emotional spiral for 2 hours because you reacted to my voice note." So you do what you've always done. You minimize it. You tell yourself you're overreacting. You smile and move on. And you've been doing that your whole life. But here's the question I want you to sit with. What if you're not overreacting? What if your nervous system is just working differently than everyone else's? There's a side effect to all of this that doesn't get talked about enough. You stop asking for things. Not because you've become easygoing, but because the risk of a no, or even a yes that comes with the wrong energy, feels like too much to handle. So you just opt out. You need help with something at work. You don't ask. You figure it out alone and burn 3 extra hours doing it. You want to tell your partner that something they said bothered you. You don't bring it up. You just get a little quieter and hope it passes. You need to follow up with someone for the 3rd time on something important. You don't. Because the fear of coming across as annoying or needy
outweighs the actual need. And then you start to resent the load you're carrying. Not anyone specifically, just the whole thing. The weight of managing every situation so that nobody ever has a reason to pull away from you. That is a survival strategy, built over years, and it makes complete sense once you understand where it's actually coming from. I want to walk you through the full loop, because I think once you see it laid out, you're going to recognize it immediately. Something happens. Could be small. A tone in someone's voice, a one-word reply, a moment in a meeting where you felt invisible. Something that most people would process in 60 seconds and forget. But your body reacts first, before your brain even has a chance to think. Your chest tightens. You get that pit in your stomach feeling. There's this full-body alarm, not quite anxiety, not quite sadness, just this wave of something that feels urgent and overwhelming. Then your brain kicks in and tries to make sense of it. And it almost always defaults to the worst-case interpretation. What did I do wrong? What does this mean? Are they pulling away? Then, here's the part that really stings. You feel embarrassed for having the reaction at all, because you're self-aware enough to know it might be nothing.
You've been calling yourself too sensitive your whole life, too emotional, too reactive, too much. But here's what I want you to consider before we go any further. What if too much was never the right diagnosis? What if the real issue is that nobody ever gave you the correct map for how your brain actually works? What you've been experiencing has a name. It's called rejection-sensitive dysphoria, RSD, and it is directly neurologically tied to ADHD. Now, I know some of you just tensed up because ADHD doesn't look like what you think it looks like. Maybe you weren't the hyperactive kid bouncing off the walls. Maybe you did fine in school, or at least fine enough. Maybe you've always held it together on the outside. ADHD in adults, especially in people who internalize everything, who feel deeply, who've spent years masking and managing, looks completely different than what we were taught. And rejection-sensitive dysphoria is one of the biggest reasons it gets missed. So let me break down what's actually happening in your brain, in plain English. Every brain has an emotional regulation system. Think of it like a volume dial. When something hard happens, criticism at work, a cold response from someone you love, feeling left out, that dial is supposed to turn back down. You feel it, you process it, you move on. In ADHD brains, that dial is dysregulated. The volume spikes, fast, hard, and it doesn't come back down the way it's supposed to. This isn't a metaphor. This is about dopamine. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter responsible for motivation, emotional regulation, and reward processing. In ADHD brains, the dopamine system doesn't function the same way. There's either too little of it, or the receptors don't respond to it properly. And when something feels like rejection or failure, the dopamine crash is immediate, and it hits hard. Your nervous system interprets it as a genuine threat, not just an uncomfortable feeling. That's why it feels so physical. That's why it hits before you can think your way out of it. That's why executive dysfunction kicks in and you can't just logic yourself calm. Dr. William Dodson, one of the leading ADHD psychiatrists in the country, describes RSD as an emotional response that's not just stronger than average, but neurologically categorized as a threat at the same level as physical danger. Your nervous system is not being dramatic. It is doing exactly what it was wired to do. And here's the part most people don't know. This is not caused by childhood trauma or being criticized too much growing up. Those things can make it worse. But RSD is biological. It's there from birth. And it shows up almost exclusively in people with ADHD. This is validating and slightly frustrating in a relatable way. So why doesn't anyone talk about this? Why did you spend years, maybe decades, thinking you were just wired wrong? Because the way we screen for and talk about ADHD in the US is still largely built around one image: the hyperactive kid who can't sit still in a third-grade classroom. That image doesn't include the college student who pulls all-nighters, not because they're procrastinating, but because their brain can't initiate until the deadline pressure creates enough adrenaline to substitute for the dopamine it can't produce on its own. It doesn't include the remote worker who looks productive on Slack but spends 4 hours in ADHD paralysis, staring at a blank document, unable to start, hating themselves for it. It doesn't include the person who's been in therapy for anxiety and depression for 3 years, making some progress, but never quite getting to the root because nobody connected the dots. Because here's the reality: anxiety, depression, people-pleasing, perfectionism, chronic overstimulation, emotional exhaustion. These aren't separate issues for a lot of ADHD adults. They're downstream symptoms. They're what happens when a brain that needed a specific kind of support never got it. You didn't come out of the womb believing you were too much. That story was built, year by year, from a pattern of reactions that nobody ever explained to you correctly. This should feel like a helpful next step from a friend, not a sponsored break. Okay, I want to pause here for a second, because if what I've described in this video is landing, if you're watching this and thinking, I've never heard anyone describe this so accurately, I don't want to just leave you with the concept and no next step, because RSD doesn't travel alone. It comes packaged with other things that a lot of ADHD adults experience, but never connected to the diagnosis. Things like time blindness, where you genuinely can't feel how much time has passed and you're chronically late, even though you hate being late. Executive dysfunction, where starting a task feels physically impossible, even when the task is simple and you actually want to do it. Hyperfocus, where you can lose 6 straight hours on something interesting, but you can't answer a 2-minute email that's been sitting in your inbox for a week. Overstimulation, where loud environments, too many notifications, too many people talking at once makes your brain feel like it's buffering. And the dopamine seeking, the doom scrolling, the impulsive purchases, the constant need for novelty, not because you're irresponsible, but because your brain is literally searching for the stimulation it can't produce on its own. All right, we've talked about what's happening. We've talked about why it goes undiagnosed. Now I want to talk about what actually changes when you finally understand it. This is the emotional landing. Don't rush it. This is the part that makes people subscribe. You were never too much. Here's what I need you to hear. If you have spent years, your whole adult life, maybe your whole life, believing that you are too sensitive, too emotional, too intense, too reactive, you were never too much. You were just never given the right explanation. There is a real, meaningful difference between a character flaw and a neurological difference. A character flaw is something you chose. A neurological difference is something you were born with. You did not choose to feel a K text like a gut punch. You did not choose to lie awake replaying a conversation from 3 years ago. You did not choose to go into full executive dysfunction over a task you genuinely wanted to get done. Your brain did that. A brain that was running a different operating system than the one the world was designed for, and nobody handed you the manual. And here's what shifts when you finally have the manual. You stop blaming yourself for the terrain. You stop white-knuckling your way through every day and calling it discipline. You start asking the right question, which isn't, why can't I just be normal? But, what does this brain actually need to function well? That shift, from self-blame to self-understanding, sounds simple. But for a lot of ADHD adults in the US, it's the thing that changes everything. It's what finally makes the therapy work. It's what makes the strategies actually stick. It's what makes it possible to stop performing okay and start actually being okay. If this video described your life, share it. You already know someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment with one thing from this video that hit close to home. I read every single one. And if you're just now starting to connect these dots, go easy on yourself. This is a lot to sit with. But you're asking the right questions now, and that matters. I'll see you in the next one.